Welcome back to our panel discussion, Connected Government, How to Build and Procure Network Services Now and in the Future, sponsored by Hughes and EchoStar Company here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. Our guests today are Keel Ross, Chief of Telecommunications at the Interior Department, Kimberly Hancher, Chief Information Officer of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Tony Bardo, Assistant Vice President for Government Solutions at Hughes and EchoStar Company, and Bill Lewis, Networks Program Manager in the Office of Integrated Technology Services at the General Services Administration. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And of course, we were talking about applications and how conditions that are in agency requirements are changing the telecom ways to support that. And I think one of the biggest issues is cloud computing. And as agencies move toward cloud providers, now it used to be when you saw a cloud on a slide, that cloud represented the internet. Now let's take it a step further as we mean cloud nowadays, which is a data center you don't own, roughly, just for purposes of this discussion. We know there's definitions for cloud, and our apologies to NIST on that one. But my question is, as you move to cloud computing and hosted services that are outside of your facility and accessed over wires so far, how does that change your communications requirements? Kimberly?
Our agency, we actually have been cross-servicing with the Interior Department for quite a while. So, in other words, our payroll system, our personnel system, our time and attendance systems, our financial management systems are hosted by another federal agency, Department of Interior, Interior Business Center. And so connectivity to that, to their hosting locations is really important. And in the 6 years that I've been at the EEOC, we've changed it at least 3 times. Dedicated line, and then VPN tunnel, and then VPN tunnel as a primary with a lower end dedicated line as a backup. So whenever you have a lot of mission critical applications in the cloud or at a hosting provider, you really have to think about not just the primary communications, but also the backup when things go down. We have recently provisioned our hosting provider with telecommunications capability, direct line, and we'll be putting most of our public-facing applications at that hosting provider.
All right, so let me ask you this. Payroll, personnel, time and attendance, finance, those don't sound like things where quality of service, QoS, would come into play that much. But when you start facing the public, and you have maybe streaming videos or whatever it is, EEOC puts online, does that become a factor that you need to have between you and the cloud?
It is, and streaming video happens to be one of our Achilles' heel. We can't seem to get it consistently available to all of our 53 sites, let alone the public, in a reliable manner. Something always happens. So we are working on a plan to go to a managed service because I really feel like that would be better provisioned outside the agency.
Okay, so Bill, you are Kimberly's provider in some sense, or the business center. So what are the issues with connecting people through your cloud or Interior through its cloud?
The decision point between a dedicated access and a virtual private network is sort of that first one. And if you choose the dedicated connection, you've lost some of the resiliency that you can potentially get out of cloud. That distributed data center sort of model.
Because a VPN can hop right to a different
correct. We can essentially dynamically reroute through the VPN tunnel. However, with the trusted internet connection requirements, you lose. Then you now have to sort of loop back the traffic a couple of times to make sure you're meeting all of those requirements. And I know Interior, as well as other departments, have been trying to work closely with Department of Homeland Security through their Federal Network Resiliency Group to modify the trusted interconnection, the TIC reference architecture, to try to make it more applicable to the cloud world.
And to the VPN world also?
That's correct. Yeah.
All right, so where is that effort at this point?
DHS did release a 2.1 version of TIC that did help clarify use cases, but I know Interior and I'm certain other agencies want to see it go to the next level of how can we provide that security that we need that TIC gives us without having to have to go through a dedicated TIC.
All right, and Tony, you mentioned too that as the needs change, the technologies can also change from the frame relay and the MPLS. What is coming along out of the labs and the factories here?
Well, one of the things that certainly is gets affected by the greater reliance on cloud is certainly, of course, the increased bandwidth that we've been talking about all along. But Keel mentioned something, a really important point, and that is resiliency. If you're going to require more reliance on the cloud and things not necessarily directly under your control, network resiliency is very important. So what we've seen in the commercial world, in our world at Hughes, is that greater reliance on using alternate path technology such as satellite. So in other words, the customers, of course, have their primary dedicated terrestrial services that connect either to their network or to the cloud. But you also have to build in some resiliency, some path diversity with satellite technology that can complement, not replace, but complement the terrestrial networks that are certainly in place. And of course, satellite is certainly there for the challenged locations where the terrestrial connectivity is certainly a problem. But more importantly, not more importantly, but also importantly, and emerging is the use of broadband technologies. Not your father's broadband from your DSL that you would get at home and give you 128 kilobit up and maybe 512 kilobit back down. Right. But the emerging satellite or the emerging broadband technologies that include DSL, managed DSL, cable, 3G, 4G, LTE, and satellite. Really the sort of four brands or ilks of broadband that have emerged in capability, have emerged in security on the network, and have emerged in terms of management, SLAs, care and feeding, network monitoring and management, the sort of services and management capabilities that came just sort of standard with the traditional dedicated carrier services. Where that brings savings and affordable higher speeds to customers is in that last mile. You're using that last mile that might be already there in place with either a cable or a DSL that you don't even think you're using, and yet you can turn that into a powerful network access tool, sometimes achieving twice the bandwidth of the dedicated line you have in place at half the cost. And with the budget pressures and the management pressures to add bandwidth, it's certainly something that needs to be looked at. GSA's been accommodating in that, and it goes back to the point I made earlier. These technologies really weren't there at the advent of networks. They have emerged over the last 10 years. We've been offering them at a great pace to our commercial customers. What does GSA do? They accommodate that through the GSA schedule. So these, they're finding the ways to bring these services to their customers, and I think these are going to be important. They're important now and useful now. Certainly, as we look forward to the NS 2020 initiatives and so forth, I think you'll see a greater use and availability of those services. Again, maybe not to replace the networks that are there, but bolster.
And actually, we started to look at that. Which of our 53 sites already has business cable coming in for, let's say, cable TV? And, when you think about the possibilities of internet speeds of like 50 megabits per second on a business cable for $50 a month versus, let's see, a T3, about the same amount of megabits per second, 45 megabits per second on a T3 for like $2,000 a month. And then a TIC, same thing, $8,000 a month. They're comparable services very different prices.
So I have a couple of questions coming from all this. The first one is for Keel. Briefly, can these other technologies such as 4G, LTE, or satellite, can they play in the TIC world?
Certainly, that's part of the TIC reference architecture. Interior's been using that for since the outset of TIC, and we've been using some portion of the managed broadband service. And so we have a small device that's deployed to the site that connects in to the cable modem, the DSL connection, and then allows them to come back through a secure tunnel, NIST FIPS 140-2 secured tunnel back into Interior. And we've just recently been piloting 4G hotspot technology that can also do a dedicated connection straight back into Interior, give it an IP address that's looks like they're on the wired network.
That's a good case for getting an iPad, I guess, or some similar device that has the 4G connectivity. And Bill, is the network's program office looking at this type of thing and trying to get it off schedule into networks, or is that something you're saving for NS 2020?
Well, NS 2020 is going to have an acquisition come out of it called Enterprise Infrastructure Solutions. And just make a comment on cloud that I'm sure will get me in trouble, but we are enamored with the word cloud in government. But if you go into a cloud service provider and say, where do you make your money, they will tell you that frequently it's around infrastructure as a service, but more around co-location, simply putting your computer in their data center. The other area where they would make their money would be dedicated hosting. And then finally, it's actually the fastest growing service on networks is storage services. Storage is going to be huge. Not having access to your data is a big deal. So that's going to drive the demand for bandwidth and the demand for infrastructure as a service. Folks aren't going to be able to build data centers in space fast enough to store the stuff they need to store. So the point I'm making is cloud is one application, but I'd lump it together maybe with a category of data center services that would include co-location, simply putting hardware in, dedicated hosting, infrastructure as a service, including storage services, and then even software as a service. So that's probably a different way to look at it. We can't afford to build data centers anymore. They're really sophisticated buildings if you've ever been in one. Sure. So the idea would be cloud is one aspect of that, but there are also other aspects, the security, the bandwidth, other types of deployment within that data center.
All right, now I wanted to move on to another topic. I guess we already are there, but I want to explore it a little bit more, and that's wireless, because we talk about T1s and OC192s and so forth, all kinds of terrestrial networks. And then we also mentioned earlier that people are using their cell phones as the primary telephone now, and so that's making a drop in demand on the network services for traditional telecom. So is there a convergence happening here, or how big a part will wireless play in maybe eventually replacing terrestrial with these 4G devices that are the size of a bread box you can put on your own building and so forth?
Yeah, at Interior, I like to call it infrastructure independence. We have a huge field going workforce within Interior. We have lots of scientists that are out in the field. They want access to their data and to their applications, no matter where they are. And so the wireless world is a wonder for them. It allows them to not be in the office. I think that's probably the least favorite place for a lot of these field folks. Yet there's still demands on checking email and keeping in communication. So being able to have that access wherever they are is of the utmost importance to them.
But can you see the day coming when wireless means, by whatever they are, would start to supplant terrestrial networks for the big applications and data in and out?
I'm not sure we're quite there yet. I don't know that we quite have the bandwidth capability on the wireless side, but I think if we go back to the resiliency side, we have a lot of our community that requires some very high availability numbers, and they talk carrier diversity, they talk path diversity, yet oftentimes those are running across the same set of lines that are along the same railroad tracks that a train derailment will take them both out. And the only way I can guarantee a path diversity is through satellite service or through 4G type of connectivity.
Bill, comment?
If you follow the money, the wireless portion of this is, I believe it's about a $1.3 billion market in the federal government. We do $500 million of it on schedules for your wireless devices, and we've even set up an FSSI, Federal Strategic Sourcing Initiative, BPA, to do that. But there is not a component of a communications or even a data center service that does not have a wireless component or an LTE component. I think you may get to the point where an LTE interface is in routers and you're bypassing that last mile, but even if that doesn't happen or it happens more slowly than we anticipate, wireless is here and it's growing and it's expected. Can you imagine walking into a building and not having power? No. You would expect it, and you would just kind of expect to be wired through your smartphone or tablet all the time. So that's always a component.
All right, so on that note, we're going to take a short break here. Our guests today are Bill Lewis, Networks Program Manager in the Office of Integrated Technology Services at the General Services Administration. Keel Ross is Chief of Telecommunications at the Interior Department. Kimberly Hancher is Chief Information Officer of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and Tony Bardo, Assistant Vice President for Government Solutions at Hughes and EchoStar Company. I'm Tom Temin, your moderator. This is Connected Government, How to Build and Procure Network Services for the Future, sponsored by Hughes and EchoStar Company, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.